NBA free agency is well underway, and while the Knicks haven't made any major splashes, they set their eyes on a deep shooting Villanova product and got that deal done. What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Season 3 finale of the Putback with Ian Begley on SNY's YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter pages. I'm Chelsea Sherrod with our SNY NBA insider, Ian Begley, and we are joined by two heavy hitters, two great guests who are regulars here on the show, Stefan Bondy, who has covered the Knicks for a long time for the New York Daily News, and Jonathan Macri, who tried to send out a notification on Threads. We're all trying to get down with that still. We're working on it, but we'll get there. The Dean of Knicks Film School will be taking your questions, so get them in the comment section right now. But first, let's begin with the baseline. Ian, we're going to talk about the moves that the Knicks did make, but your latest article for SNY.TV just dropped moments ago discussing the Knicks and some potential big names that could be available. Ian, what can you tell us?
Yeah, we all know that Damian Lillard and James Harden are two stars that are looking to be traded. And so I was poking around recently, and the feedback that I got was that the Knicks had held steadfast on their price point on talks about Lillard, Harden, and pretty much any other top player there. They had a price that they felt comfortable with, and they were not going to exceed it. And I think the teams that I spoke with felt that the Knicks maybe the thought was they would go higher, and that would increase the trade market for said player like a Lillard. That hasn't happened yet, and it seems to be a reflection of how those players might fit with the Knicks, but it also kind of aligns with the Knicks' general process under team president Leon Rose, which has been, a cautious one, relatively reserved, except for the Donovan Mitchell discussions last offseason.
Yeah, reserved and patience, those are two words that have been relative to the Knicks as of late. Steph, should we expect any more moves from the Knicks, especially big moves?
I don't think so, not this offseason. As Ian outlined for those two guys, they're committed to holding their price. And to be honest, none of these players, certainly not Dame Lillard or James Harden, really fit, in my opinion, into the Knicks right now as constructed. And those are the two players that are definitely available. Paul George, you hear different things about. And I think it came down to that became too expensive for the Knicks. And when you factor in Paul George's contract extension that he wants, it became a situation where they didn't want to meet that price point. So it doesn't look like, at least as of now, that something will happen in terms of the super megastar this offseason.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with you there. Jonathan, Steph's saying he's not really expecting any more big moves, but do you think there should be more moves made?
I think Steph nailed it. You look at the Knicks roster right now. I mean, we don't have to go into too, a deep of analysis. It's built around a small guard. So you're not going to go out and spend lavishly in terms of assets for another guard. That doesn't really make a ton of sense. They seem to like Mitch for what he brings on defense, unless you're getting a true super duper star center. And we could quibble about who qualifies for that, but I think the ones who fit everybody's definition, those guys aren't available, at least not until the big guy starts getting disgruntled in Philly. We'll probably touch on that later. And then you're looking at, okay, well, where is there a wing that fits in between, the Mitch and Jalen Brunson? And like all the wings out there, they're either older, if, you're talking about a Paul George, maybe injury prone, you're talking about a Kawhi Leonard, or they're in situations where they're not trying to budge their way out of, whether it's a Jason Tatum, or, younger guys like an Anthony Edwards. So I don't think that ideal target is out there, which is why I actually do think it's smart that the Knicks are not just expending all their assets to expend them.
Yeah. And again, you're talking about price points here that are very high. The Knicks do have the draft picks to be involved in these conversations, can probably put together the best package out of most suitors for these players. But it seems like the Knicks, at least to this point, have said that Damian Lillard's not the perfect fit for us. James Harden's not the perfect fit for us. On the Paul George situation, I would assume that kind of hangs out there for a little bit because Steph mentioned George's extension. If he's not extended by the Clippers, or if the Clippers kind of are still wishy-washy about it, I would assume that they continue to take calls on George because that's a situation that would be very much in flux. The Knicks and people with the Knicks I know see George as the perfect addition to this particular team at this particular time, again, just like everything else, it'll come down to price point and how willing the Clippers are to meet the Knicks where they are in terms of George.
Yeah, for sure. Ian, we do have a fan question for you. This is from Jimmy F. He says, hey, Ian, any chance the Knicks will seek or monitor an OG Anunoby trade? This is a name that we've heard a lot about, too. A lot of fans have been asking about him.
Yeah, I would assume yes. I would assume absolutely the Knicks monitor it. We know that the Knicks talked to Toronto different occasions last season about Anunoby when Toronto had been open to talking about trades of Anunoby. Now, the situation with Toronto here is interesting because Anunoby is entering the final year of his contract. And so if they struggle, does Masai Ujiri again explore those trade opportunities at the deadline? I think that's what everybody's going to be keeping an eye on here. The Toronto direction is not perfectly clear at the moment, but I would assume if they struggle and they look to make a turn towards going younger, Anunoby would again be on the table.
Yeah, and talking to people around the league, everybody is looking at Toronto right now. They're very interested to see what's going to happen with them after they lost Fred VanVleet and what direction Masai Ujiri is going to go in. At the same time, everybody's wary when they get into negotiations with Masai Ujiri because he's been known to win those negotiations. So those are two things that are happening around the league right now with the Raptors. Yeah,
Jonathan, what are your thoughts? We were just talking about these wing players. What are your thoughts on OG Anunoby?
Yeah, so I'll just pick up on what I was saying before. There may not be the super duper star wing that perfectly fits everything the Knicks may want in terms of age, price point, the whole thing. OG Anunoby is pretty darn close, though. I mean, I know he's not a star. He's never made an all-star team, made all-defense second team last year, and I think he earned that designation. I mean, you look at the shooting, you look at he's the right age. You know, I think he's the same age as Jalen Brunson, 26 years old or whereabouts. And he, you know, it certainly caught my eye, as I know it caught the eye of maybe some of the other panelists here, that he switched agencies recently to CAA. So, you know, if you're someone that is of the belief that CAA clients may, you know, be more inclined to become Knicks or stay Knicks than with other agencies, then maybe it's just a perfect fit.
Yeah, super close there. His birthday's actually on the 17th. He turns 26 in 10 days. Yeah, shooting close to 40% from three, close to 50% from the field. Ian?
Yeah, I didn't know the Knicks had ties to CAA. Can you break that down a little bit for us? I wasn't aware.
So, somebody had heard around the way. We'll have to dig into that one further sometime.
Steph, we have a fan question for you, and this comes from Triple M. Do you agree with the Knicks' general process on acquiring a star?
So I was in the camp of they should have traded for Donovan Mitchell when they had the opportunity. And I probably stick by that. And I know the prices have changed for stars, which makes them look better because it's gone down since those negotiations, and in part because of those negotiations. At the same time, I still think of Donovan Mitchell as the best player that I see that's available, and that might change if Joel Embiid becomes available. But as far as this offseason, I do agree with it. And because all those players that are either semi-available or available, I just don't see them as the right fit on this team. And taking the patient approach, I think, with this crop of disgruntled star players, I think was the right move.
And then just looking at it from the other side, I mean, Steph just nailed it in terms of the cost of acquisition, and then are the targets the right targets? If you look at internally, what's going to happen to the assets the Knicks have now? Are they going to, and you don't like to, refer to players as assets, but like, look, you have to look at a player and what are they going to do this season? Are they going to be more valuable a year from now? Are they going to be less valuable a year from now? I think part of why them not trading for Donovan Mitchell when they did worked out in their favor, depending on which package you believe would have gone to Utah, is they kept Immanuel Quickley, and I think he certainly got more value. I would argue that Quentin Grimes probably at least maintained his value, if not went up. And RJ, that's, I think, a little bit more debatable. But you could definitely make the argument that those three players I just mentioned are going to have an opportunity to get even better in the year ahead. So if that's the case, then maybe it becomes that much easier to make this sort of a deal, a year from now.
But to me, there's also a timeline. Like there's a window because you're going to have to start paying these guys. And and I think at some point you're going to have to pull the trigger. Like, you can't just keep kicking this thing down the road. So I think there is a window here that they need to abide by.
Yeah, valid point there from you, Steph. Ian, let's get into Karl-Anthony Towns. Is there any word or is there any potential that the Knicks would even try to go after a guy like him? We've been talking about these big names, talking about a big center. What's the word on Karl-Anthony Towns?
Yeah, I think, because my read on it was, if the Knicks had really strong, like, uniform interest on acquiring Towns, they could have done it, before the draft or earlier in free agency. I know that teams in touch with the T-Wolves, in their discussions about trades, Karl Towns' name was brought up. I don't know Minnesota's current stance on trading or not trading Towns, and I don't know if Minnesota was the one bringing Karl Towns' name up. But just the sense I got in this offseason was that if the Knicks wanted to go there, they could have gone there. And so that tells me that at the very least, not all top decision makers see Towns as the perfect fit. I think you look at the situation in Minnesota, they just paid Anthony Edwards. They're going to have to pay McDaniels on an extension, Gobert and Towns on monster contracts. And you just think something has to give there, whether it's Towns or Gobert. But to Steph's earlier point also, on the Knick timeline, Jalen Brunson has a player option for 25-26. I believe. So at that point, you're not going to have Jalen Brunson on a team-friendly deal anymore. You're going to have to pay him. And this new CBA, it really dissuades teams from spending a ton of money on team salary. So I think that might be the window that you're working with before Brunson hits free agency and you pay him that next deal.
Yeah, good information to know there. Okay, let's get into a guy that the Knicks newly acquired. Ian, you reported that the Knicks have signed Donte DiVincenzo to a 4-year, $50 million deal. So how did this deal come together?
Yeah, I was told that early on, Leon Rose and, I'm sure Jalen Brunson saw DiVincenzo as a really, really important potential add for this team, even before the draft. And so this was one of their top guys all along. I know there was some support for Bruce Brown as well, but I think once Bruce Brown found a big offer from Indiana, which he did, he's getting 20 plus a year over 2 years, there was no question he was going to take that deal. And then the Knicks, I always felt if the money was equal with DiVincenzo or even close to equal, DiVincenzo was going to choose New York. He did have other suitors that had the potential to make an offer similar to what the Knicks did, and you saw that he chose New York. So I think this was a guy that the Knicks had on their minds very early on in the process, and then they were able to execute.
Yeah, absolutely. Now he's reunited with Josh Hart and Jalen Brunson. Steph, what does DiVincenzo bring to this current Knicks team?
Well, I think what you're going to hear a lot of when Tom Thibodeau, next time we talk to Tom Thibodeau, whenever that is Dante's a winner. And we heard that a lot with Jalen Brunson. And we're going to hear that a lot about Donte, because he won at the high school level. He won at the college level. And he won, I know he was hurt during the playoffs in 2021, but he has an NBA title and he's played on good teams. So I think we're going to hear a lot about his impact on winning. As far as, what he brings on the court, he's a solid shooter, a little streaky, but, high IQ guy who brings it. And we're going to hear a lot about his impact on winning, similar to what we hear about Jalen Brunson and Josh Hart, his two Villanova teammates. The Knicks figured it worked out with those two. Why don't we just get another Wildcat in there?
Yeah, I completely co-sign with everything Steph said. I'll pick up on the shooting point. He brings some things as a shooter that the Knicks don't have a lot of. Obviously, catch and shoot threat. I mean, Quentin Grimes is the big one right now, currently on the roster. DiVincenzo adds that. But if you go even a little deeper, and I'll shout out one of my colleagues, DJ Zullo, who pointed out DiVincenzo particularly good coming off of screens. The Knicks don't really have a shooter who brings that in terms of their arsenal. And his shots from, a lot of threes, but long distance threes. His average 3-point distance is longer than anyone currently on the Knicks. And then just the one other component is, and you think back to when they signed Evan Fournier a couple years ago, because they wanted someone who, not just a catch and shoot threat, but if someone closes out hard, could put the ball on the floor. That's a DiVincenzo specialty. And you look at his assist rate. His assist rate is basically similar to Immanuel Quickley's, who's kind of like a combo guard. So he could really do everything on offense. A little small for a wing, but that's why you're able to get him for, $12+ million a year.
Yeah, and he shot a career high from three, 39.7% last season, so he's getting better each season. Let's move things over to Obi Toppin. And Ian, according to you, this is what you've been reporting, the Knicks traded Obi to the Pacers for 2 second-round picks. This was, of course, a disappointing end to the Knicks' relationship with the former 8th overall pick. But Ian, what are your thoughts on the trade?
Yeah, I think go to the day that the Knicks drafted Toppin to the day they traded him. To me, it was a huge swing and a miss by the organization because bottom line is you take Obi Toppin at 8 in 2020, you trade him in 2023 for 2 future second rounders and some salary flexibility. I mean, that tells you all you need to know about how things unfolded here. Now, there are details throughout the course of the 3 years where maybe you say the Knicks could have done a better job with Toppin. Toppin could have played better, forced the Knicks' hand. But the bottom line, take the player out of the equation. Just look at the draft slot, and this was mishandled by New York. And one thing is, initially, I think they thought that Julius Randle would be able to be moved in Toppin's first season or in that offseason. Obviously, Randle flips the script and puts together an all-star, all-NBA season. But I think even at that point, once you know Randle is your guy, your engine, so to speak, you should explore trade opportunities for Toppin because he's probably at his highest value there coming off his rookie season.
Yeah, it just feels like it was a failed experiment that was kind of just like drawn out for some. Steph, what are your overall thoughts on Obi Toppin's tenure in New York?
I agree with Ian. I did have a problem though with the trade because if you're just going to get back, this is to me, you're in a win now situation. You've stepped into that timeline with the Knicks. Like you're not really a rebuilding team. You haven't had draft picks in the last 2 years. You're trying to win and you're trading away. And I get it. Like Obi was frustrated. He wasn't playing as many minutes as he thought. He was still a big part of a bench that was the best in the league 2 years ago and was pretty good last year. And he served a purpose on this roster, and you traded him for nothing. You could have found the financial flexibility somewhere else to stay under the luxury tax. So I don't buy that part of it. To me, that trade really was only about helping Obi and getting him to a situation where he's going to be able to show he can work for that next big contract because he wasn't going to get that with the Knicks probably. But I still thought he could have helped the Knicks. And so trading him for 2 second-round picks was just a complete waste in my opinion. And, it kind of leads to my opinion, that there's kind of mixed feelings about this offseason. I agree. I like the Donte DiVincenzo signing. I like the fact that they were reserved with some of these superstars who don't necessarily fit. But how much better did they get by trading Obi Toppin for nothing and just bring in DiVincenzo? I don't think they got that much better this offseason. So that's kind of where I stand.
Yeah, I mean, just on the Obi thing, I mean, I've said this a lot, but I think the original sin was you go back to draft night of 2020, you had at that point a roster that was, I mean, you want to say RJ Barrett was a cornerstone piece, okay, maybe Mitchell Robinson, and you had Julius Randle here, just like the guys just mentioned, and they may have been counting on the fact that they were going to have a Julius Randle trade lined up, but at the same time, there's a guy that averaged 20 points for them the year before. They had to know going into that year that they were going to maintain a certain price point on Julius Randle as far as what they were willing to accept back from him via trade. So to box yourself into a guy who plays one position, and it was the one position that the guy who had just led the team in scoring, plays and was tied to a significant contract. When you had a guy like Devin Vassell sitting right there, who's a wing, put him at the 2, put him at the 3, put him at the 4. To say nothing of, like a Tyrese Halliburton, but then we get into a whole sliding doors thing with Jalen Brunson, which that's a different story. But like they had options, and to Steph's point, they had options. They could have traded Obi probably after the first year and got more back, but they didn't want to do that.
Yeah. So Steph, should the Knicks be open to criticism for the success rate of their first round draft picks, given how this has gone with Obi?
Oh, yeah. Overall, I mean, not certain. Most of that, though, isn't on the current front office. I think the worst draft picks were Frank Ntilikina and Kevin Knox, and that was the Steve Mills, Scott Perry era. So you can't put that on Leon Rose. I think Leon's actually done well with his late first-round picks and a little bit with his second-round picks. I know Mitchell Robinson was a second-round pick from Steve Mills and Scott Perry. But yeah, I mean, listen, you look at the teams that are successful around the league, and you take LeBron. Let's take LeBron James out of the equation. The championship teams are still built through the draft. You got to hit on these draft picks. Hit on their draft picks. Yet the Milwaukee Bucks hit on their draft pick with Giannis Antetokounmpo. That's still how you win in this league, and the Knicks have not really done that with the opportunities that they've given themselves. They had 5 lottery picks from 2015 to 2020, and only one is left on the team, and that's RJ Barrett.
Give the Knicks credit for the picks that they have made, Quickley, Grimes, McBride, some strong picks. But, they traded their first rounder last year, in essence, to help them clear up the cap space to sign Jalen Brunson. That seems like a very good move. With regards to, their future first, they have all their future first round picks. But, they have been mostly silent in that first round outside of Toppin, which did not work well. So if this experiment kind of flatlines at some point and the veterans that they've brought in, they don't lead them to where the Knicks want to go, I think you could certainly look back and question the decisions to punt on some drafts. Right now, it seems to have worked given where Jalen Brunson has this team ascending, coming off of a strong season. So I think the jury's out at the moment about what Leon Rose has done with his draft picks, but by and large, they have passed up on some opportunities.
Yeah, great points from the both of you. Jonathan, we have a fan question. It comes from Devin FCB. And Devin says, thoughts on replacing Obi's minutes with a combo of Hartenstein at power forward and Sims at center in the second unit?
I mean, look, I may be on an island on this, but I've crunched. I mean, it's not that many numbers to crunch, just the minutes that are going to be available for this rotation and this roster next year. And I can't figure out any way that they're going to do this other than to just play, whether you want to say Josh Hart or RJ Barrett as the backup 4. Because if you start playing, whether it's Hartenstein as the backup 4, or you want to say it's Sims or Isaiah Roby, or they bring someone in off the street, whatever that player is. And if you're going to play someone in your rotation, that player is going to get a bare minimum of, let's say, 12 minutes. Well, all of a sudden that may not sound like a lot, 12 minutes, but then you go and you have to dip into Quentin Grimes' minutes, Donte DiVincenzo's minutes, Immanuel Quickley's minutes, maybe RJ Barrett's minutes. And all of a sudden you're going to have those guys playing like 20 minutes a night. I mean, I'm not the insider that these guys are, but I could pretty well safely sit here and say Immanuel Quickley, Quentin Grimes, Donte DiVincenzo, these guys don't want to be playing 18, 19, 20 minutes a night. They want to be, playing a little bit more than that. So unless there's another move coming, I kind of see it as the 9-man rotation, and they're just going to go small with that backup 4 spot.
Right, John. And then also they had so much success with that 9-man rotation last season. Yeah. Tom Thibodeau cut it to 9 and they took off. So I just have a hard time seeing them bringing in another player or saying, hey, we're going to commit to player X for backup power forward minutes. I just think they stick with 9 and see how it goes.
Yeah, one player who really excelled in that rotation was Josh Hart, and he opted into his player option. Ian, you wrote about Hart's potential extension in your latest article for SNY.TV. What could that extension look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely coming, and I'm not breaking any news there because he wouldn't have opted in without that extension being firmly on the table. I think as far as I've heard, it's going to come in under that max of 81, and it should be, 4 years in length. So they'll have Josh Hart under contract for 5 seasons. And I'm sure that makes Tom Thibodeau happy because he's a huge Josh Hart fan. But getting him at that number 2, as you see the salary cap, we think it's just going to keep increasing here, especially with, new media rights deals coming up. That deal is going to look really good, assuming Josh Hart continues to play at the level that he's established or exceeds it. That's going to look like a very good contract towards the end of it. And now the thing with Hart is, the 3-point shooting. He was fantastic when he got to New York initially. He did not shoot it well for most of the playoffs. So where is he over the course of 82 games? And what the Knicks hope is another postseason run. Where does he sit as a 3-point shooter? Is it strong? Is it passable? Is it not passable?
Yeah, that production is definitely something to keep an eye on. Let's look ahead a little bit to 2024, Steph. What could be awaiting the Knicks over the next 12 months, including next offseason, as far as a potential big splash?
Well, all right, so let's assume they maintain all these assets that they have. They have all these draft picks. I think that then you have to make a move. we talked about this timeline and this window, and these draft picks aren't gonna, they're just sitting there. So you have to use them at some point. And if you're in a win now situation and you've been waiting for that star player that you want to become available, I think you have to pull the trigger next summer if you don't do it this summer, or during next season. And we've all heard about the possibility and the dream of Joel Embiid and Giannis Antetokounmpo. And I think those are the two guys you put at the very, very top. And if either of those guys become available, the Knicks will give up all their assets to get them.
Yeah. So, Jonathan, Steph just mentioned Joel Embiid, Giannis Antetokounmpo. Which one or two players is on the top of your mind when it comes to potentially bringing in a superstar over the next 365 days?
I mean, Giannis would be lovely. I'm not holding my breath for him. I mean, it's Embiid. We don't have to beat around the bush here. He's the guy. Everybody. I mean, the CAA connections. Again, we could joke about it, but like they're there. You swap him out for Mitch. You don't lose anything on defense like you would be with Towns. I mean, I think it's a hand in glove fit between him and Brunson running pick and rolls. I think that's your path. I think the biggest questions for me will be, number one, let's say Philadelphia, Daryl Morey pulls a rabbit out of his hat and Philly has a fantastic year, the best year of the process, so to speak, and Joel Embiid is a happy camper. Do they then go to Karl-Anthony Towns, at a perhaps a lower price point? Because as Ian spoke about before, I mean, you got to pay the piper in Minnesota at some point. I don't think they're going to be a second apron team if they're not a contender. So is that the thing? Or as Steph brought up before, Donovan Mitchell, who they almost traded for last summer, in a year, he's going to just have one more year left on that deal. Would they go with a small backcourt, and see if that could work out and try to figure out the defense? I think that the easiest thing, again, would be if Embiid ass out and then and here's the best part, depending on your viewpoint, they don't have to quibble about, do we go all in for Embiid? Do we go halfway? No, you're giving up whatever it takes to get Joel Embiid, and then you're walking away.
And I want to throw one more name out there because nobody knows what's going to happen in Phoenix. That thing could go crazy and haywire. But Devin Booker, CAA guy, I know we don't talk what connection that is. I don't know. And also Kentucky. So he's another guy that, if he ever becomes available, that the Knicks would jump all over.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I think that the most important on-court results here for the Knicks outside of the Garden are happening at the Wells Fargo Center this year with Philadelphia because of what you guys have all talked about, right? Because what's Daryl Morey going to do with James Harden? Does he keep him? He's under contract. Does he keep him going into the season and roll the dice? Do they get a platter back that maybe is not as good as Harden himself? I don't think they're in a choice where they can settle for anything less that makes them a championship contender if you're trading James Harden. So that's a high bar. And, look, let's see what happens in Philly. But the connections for Embiid are there. I think that, even maybe behind the scenes a little bit over the course of the last few years in Philly, he's been upset with some of the decisions that have been made, which seems obvious from the outside because of how things have gone. But I think they're at an inflection point here, right? Ben Simmons is gone. They went all in for James Harden. Daryl Morey wanted James Harden. He got him. And it hasn't worked to date. So I could see easily how Embiid would kind of throw his hands up in the air if the Sixers struggle again next season.
Yeah, could be looking for a fresh start. Ian, we do have a fan question for you. It comes from Alejandro. And they say, any news around Immanuel Quickley signing an extension soon?
Yeah, those extensions, they usually come in kind of right before the season. It's pretty rare for a late first-round pick to get an extension done early in the offseason. So, I think part of it with Quickley was where are the Knicks going in terms of a big trade, because he and Quentin Grimes, I think, would be at the top of the list for any monster trades where you're bringing back a top player. Now that it seems like the waters have settled there, I would assume that the conversations would really start in earnest in training camp or prior to that. And I think, if the Knicks could get Quickley on a deal that they feel not only they would like, but I think other teams would like, they would be all for that, because I think no matter what happens here in New York, Immanuel Quickley, fantastic young player, a great pick by the Knicks. I think a great person off the court. So I would want him on my team. But no matter what happens here, if the Knicks are going to be out there looking to make a big trade, Immanuel Quickley is just going to be in the middle of it. He's going to be a player that teams ask about regardless of whether he's signed to an extension or not. So I think that's something you always have to keep in the back of your mind when you're talking about Quickley and his future in New York.
Yeah, absolutely. We do have a fan question for Steph and Jonathan, but I'll start with you, Steph. It comes from Ronald Bunting, and Ronald says, how deep in the playoffs do you think the Knicks can go as currently constructed?
How deep can they go? I think they could be, if all things fall in their favor, they could be a conference finalist. We just saw Miami do that, and nobody predicted that could happen. With that being said, I expect them to be right back to where, barring a big trade, back to where they were last season, which is the second round.
You could tell me. I mean, sure, you could sell me on conference finals.
It's possible. That's all.
I've drank the Kool-Aid before. I mean, some things would need to break right. Maybe a well-timed injury here or there, like the Heat, by the way, got in the first round. You could tell me that would have won that series anyway, but the Giannis injury certainly helped. You could tell me they get eliminated in a tough first round series. And I want to preface this by be very clear. I'm not comparing the Knicks to the pre-championship Warriors, but sometimes things aren't linear. You remember that Warrior team they beat Denver in the first round, then they had a tough 6-game series with the Spurs. The next year they got eliminated in the first round, against the Clippers, and then, took off after that. So sometimes it doesn't happen as you would like it. That said, I think it would be nice if they made it at least as far next year as they made it this season.
It would be nice.
Sorry, go ahead, Chelsea.
No, you're good. I was just saying it would be nice. Oh, the possibilities.
I look at the teams in the Knicks division specifically. I mean, Boston with Porzingis. We'll see what happens with Damian Lillard. I think they're alive there until they're not. But also, we talked about Philadelphia already. And Brooklyn, look, Mikal Bridges back, Cam Johnson back. Do they feel comfortable as a place where Tyler Hero could come in a 3-team deal, sending Lillard to Miami? We'll see. But, I think that team has something going there. So there's going to be tough games for this Knicks team throughout the season, even within its division. I think, yeah, sure, conference finals, I think, is a possibility, depending on how things break. But, yeah, a million things would have to break right to me for that to happen. And I think so many things broke right for them last year to get to 47 wins. The goal here, though, is to keep ascending. So if there's another backslide, like we saw after their first playoff appearance against Atlanta, that's going to lead to, I think, a lot of questions externally and internally about the direction of the club.
Yeah, absolutely. Ian, last question for you. What are some things to keep an eye on moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, I'm keeping an eye on what happens in Philadelphia. I'm keeping an eye on where things go in Milwaukee. I mean, it sounds crazy, right? The idea that Giannis Antetokounmpo would ever leave the Bucks, but I've just heard too much from people that I trust about, the idea that may look at this extension, see where he goes with this extension, and see how the Bucks do. So I would just keep an eye on that as a fan and as somebody who's interested in the NBA. And then the continued ascension to me of Jalen Brunson. Tom Thibodeau spoke every day about how Jalen Brunson just seems to get better year after year after year, find ways to improve. So I'm curious to see what the encore will be this coming season after a fantastic first season in New York.
Yeah, he's just been absolutely incredible. I'm excited to see how he does when he has another Villanova guy with him on the court. That should be fun. All right. Thank you all for watching this edition of the Putback with Ian Begley. And thank you for watching all season long as well. We'll be back in the fall for complete coverage of the Knicks as they head into the 2023-2024 season. Our thanks to Stefan Bondy of the Daily News and Jonathan Macri of Knicks Film School. And of course, our very thanks to Ian Begley. Ian, it's been a fun third season. What are your thoughts on how the season has gone?
Yeah, we had a good time, right? I mean, look, it helps when the Knicks are successful, but we had a lot of fun. And I'm excited about next year because the basketball will be fun. The discussions around the basketball will be fun. So I thank everybody for joining us throughout this season 3, and definitely keep us locked in for season 4 as we get started in training camp here in a few months.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, for now, follow Ian's coverage on social media as well on SNY.TV. For Ian Begley, I'm Chelsea